The ceremony had been going for 11 minutes when the patrol cars pulled up. 3 cars. The kind of arrival that announces itself. Lights on. The specific sound of radios cutting off as officers step out. The backyard of the house on Elmwood Avenue had been transformed for the occasion. 140 guests, chairs in neat rows, a floral arch that Marcus Williams's daughter had helped design. The kind of gathering that had taken months to plan, and that the whole block had known about for weeks. When the gate opened and 2 officers stepped through, the music stopped. The guests closest to the back went still. Some of the children moved toward their parents. The call had come from the house next door. A neighbor named Robert Dalton had reported, in a language chosen carefully, in the specific vocabulary that certain people use when they want to deploy authority without appearing to claim it, a suspicious gathering, noise disturbance, potential public safety issue. He had been watching from his upstairs window with the satisfaction of someone who believed he was about to watch a celebration be dismantled. The 2 officers entered the backyard. They looked at the assembled guests. They looked at the groom. One of them came to attention. The salute that followed, precise, formal, the full military standard, was not something Robert Dalton had factored into his call. He had not factored in who the groom was. That was the only mistake in his calculation. It was also the one that was going to cost him everything. That like button is right there. Hit it if this story already has you. Subscribe if you haven't. It costs you nothing. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let me take you back to who Marcus Williams was before he was the groom. Marcus Williams was 43 years old and had been with the city's police department for 21 of them. He had joined at 22 with the specific, unfashionable belief that the institution could be both imperfect and worth fixing from the inside, that the alternative to giving up on it was staying and doing the work. He had stayed and done the work in ways that had, over 21 years, produced a career record that most of his colleagues described as simply the best they had seen. He had risen through the department not through politics, though he understood institutional politics well enough to navigate them, but through the specific compound interest of consistent competence in situations that required more than competence, crisis negotiations that ended without harm, community relationships built in neighborhoods that had every historical reason to distrust the department he represented, a pattern of decisions over 2 decades that said the same thing, clearly enough that people eventually stopped needing to say it aloud. 3 months before the wedding, the city council had confirmed his appointment as police chief. He was the first black police chief in the city's history. He was also, since his wife Diana had died of cancer 4 years earlier, a single father to 2 children, James, who was 14, and Sophie, who was 11, who had navigated the specific grief of a family reduced without warning, and had come out of it intact in the ways that matter most, which was mostly because Marcus had made their intactness the primary project of his life during those 4 years. The woman he was marrying was named Caroline. She was 39 and a pediatric nurse, and had met Marcus 2 years earlier at a hospital fundraiser where he had been speaking and she had been volunteering, and they had talked for 2 hours at the edge of a room full of more important-looking conversations. She was, by the specific assessment of Marcus's children, who had formed opinions on the subject with the particular authority of children who understood what was at stake, exactly right. Robert Dalton was 67 and had lived on Elmwood Avenue for 23 years. He was not, by most visible measures, a remarkable man. He had a retirement income, a well-maintained house, and the specific bitterness of someone who had spent decades watching a neighborhood change in ways he had never accepted and had expressed his non-acceptance through the specific mechanism available to him, the phone call. He had been making calls for years, not just about Marcus, about the family 2 doors down who he had reported for parking, for noise, for a gathering that had been a birthday party for a 9-year-old, about the family across the street who he had reported, in different months, for 3 separate items that each investigation had found to be without merit. He had developed, over the years, a skill for framing calls in ways that produced responses without producing any direct, visible responsibility to himself. He had called about Marcus's household twice before. Both calls had been investigated and closed without action. Both were on record. The two officers who entered the backyard were named Rodriguez and Chen. Both had been on the force for 6 and 7 years, respectively. Both recognized Marcus Williams within the first 3 seconds of stepping through the gate, not only because he was the police chief, but because he had spent years building the kind of department presence that meant people knew him as a person rather than as a title. What followed was a brief, professional exchange that was also, in its visible form, one of the more unusual moments either of them had experienced in their careers. Rodriguez came to attention. The salute was automatic and entirely sincere. Marcus acknowledged it with the calm of someone who had not particularly wanted his wedding interrupted, but who understood that the officers were doing exactly what they should be doing, which was responding to a call and assessing the situation. He told them what was happening. They already knew what was happening. They had known before they came through the gate. But the protocol existed for a reason, and Marcus had spent 21 years respecting protocol. Rodriguez confirmed the situation. He confirmed the call's origin, which address it had come from, which was not something the caller had expected to become a data point of any relevance. Marcus thanked them for responding. He told them to enjoy the rest of their shift. Rodriguez said, "Congratulations, Chief." Both officers left. The music, after a moment that held its breath and then released, started again. The ceremony continued. What Marcus did not do in the immediate moment was turn toward the house next door and address Robert Dalton in any visible way. He did not point. He did not make a statement to the assembled guests about what had just happened. He did not perform the anger he was managing internally with the controlled precision he had spent 2 decades developing. He turned back to Caroline. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has just watched a person demonstrate exactly who they are in a situation designed to make them be someone else. The officiant asked if they were ready to continue. Marcus said they were. The ceremony concluded without further interruption. That like button is there. It's free to hit. Subscribe if you haven't. Drop your location in the comments. Where are you watching from right now? Now the part where Dalton's record starts to unravel. The Department of Internal Affairs began its review of Robert Dalton's call history the following Monday morning. This was not at Marcus's direct instruction. It was initiated by the city's Civilian Oversight Board, which had received 3 separate requests for investigation, following a video of the wedding moment that had been recorded by a guest, posted to social media, and viewed 14 million times in 48 hours. The video had not been posted maliciously. Marcus's cousin had posted it with the caption, "When you call the police on a black wedding and they salute the groom." The video showed the salute, the exchange, the officers departing, and the music resuming. Nothing more inflammatory than what had actually happened, which was sufficient on its own. The Oversight Board's review of Dalton's call history produced a document that was, in its quiet accumulation of 14 years of recorded calls, considerably more damning than any single incident. 46 documented calls from the same phone number, 38 of them involving addresses occupied by families of color. 6 different families across the same 2-block radius, each with multiple call entries. The investigations associated with each call, documented in the department's records, had found actionable issues in 4 of the 46. The 4 were noise complaints from a single occasion, a parking violation, and 2 separate incidents involving an unlicensed food cart that had been operating on the public sidewalk. The other 42 had been closed without action. The pattern, once assembled in a single document and submitted to the city attorney's office, was not ambiguous. The city attorney reviewed it. She contacted Dalton's attorney. The charges that followed, criminal harassment, misuse of emergency services, civil rights violations under the city's anti-discrimination ordinance, were not charges that the wedding video had produced. They were charges that 46 calls, assembled into a single documented pattern, had made inevitable. The wedding video had simply been the moment when people were looking in the right direction to notice what had always been there. Marcus was asked, in his official capacity, whether he intended to participate in the prosecution or whether he was recusing himself given the personal connection. He recused himself entirely. He stated, in a brief written response to the inquiry, that the matter was a legal proceeding that would be handled by the appropriate authorities according to the evidence, and that he had no interest in participating in the prosecution of any individual who would be entitled to due process. He was asked by a journalist whether he felt the system had worked. He said, "The system worked because people in the system did their jobs. That's what I've always asked for." The journalist asked if he thought the neighbor understood what he had done. Marcus said, "That's his business. Mine is making sure the people in my department do their jobs with integrity so that the next call from that block gets the same professional response this one did." What happened in the weeks after the video circulated was not entirely predictable. The attention that arrived at Marcus and Caroline's address was mostly supportive. Cards, flowers, messages, the specific warmth of a public that had watched something unjust attempted and something just happen instead. But Marcus had been doing this long enough to understand that attention is not the same as change, and that the kind of change his city actually needed was not going to arrive through viral videos. It was going to arrive through work. He launched the community policing initiative he had been developing since before the appointment, accelerating its timeline in the context of the attention now available to give it momentum. The initiative was specific and operational. 8 community liaison officers, each assigned to specific neighborhoods, with dedicated meeting schedules, community feedback mechanisms, and quarterly reports made publicly available on the department's website. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of thing that produces results over years rather than news cycles. He presented it to the city council in a meeting, attended by more residents than any council presentation he had been part of. He said the goal was not for people to trust him. He said the goal was for people to trust the department enough to engage with it, so that the department could do its job better, so that the people in the department could be the kind of officers who show up at a wedding and handle a false call professionally and leave without making the situation anything other than what it was. The council approved the initiative unanimously.